Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
Welcome back, listeners. On this podcast, as you've heard, we like to cover three main areas. One is energy innovation and topics around that. The second is Wyoming and its energy sector and what's happening in the state. And then the third area is leadership, whether it be in the energy sector or just leadership broadly. And so today's guest can cover all three. So welcome, Rita Meyer. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Holly. It's great to be with you.
So let's start talking about where you grew up, anything from your early years that you feel influenced your life. How did it start?
I'm a rural girl. I was born and raised on a farm in northeastern Nebraska and moved to the Sandhills of Nebraska to a ranch. So I had both the farm and the ranch experience, it's a great place to be from. I grew up knowing hard work. I had great teachers, went to a one-room school, had a lot of experiences with 4-H clubs and all the things that you get to do in 4-H, all the leadership that you grow within yourself because of that experience, and also a lot of church activities. So a lot of family-centered communities, both from the farm community and the ranch community. My dad was a hired hand. We never owned a house or a piece of land. We worked for others, and I always say we were the hired kids, but we didn't get paid. And there were 5 of us kids. So we worked hard on the farm, milking cows, and when we moved to ranch country, the work was a lot different, but still very family-centric.
Wow. So talk about your education. Where'd you go? What'd you study?
Sure. Of course, I went to some one-room schools and then graduated to a school, an elementary school, when they closed the country school in a small town of 80 people. It was a K through 6 in Johnstown, Nebraska, the heart of the Sandhills. Went to an all-county high school, Ainsworth High School, and it had all the kids from all the county and some edges of bordering counties because those counties are pretty big up in the Sandhills. And my graduating class was 69 kids. So not real big, but plenty big enough. A school where you get an opportunity for a lot of experiences because there are not many of you to field the basketball team and all of the other extracurricular activities. I left home. We were a very poor family. I went to a technical school. I had the ability, certainly, to be academically in a college, but no way to get there, being from a poor family at the time I grew up. People didn't pay a lot of attention to kids. The high school counselors didn't. Our high school counselor was a football coach, the basketball coach, and the science teacher, so didn't have a lot of time. It kind of fell through the cracks in those years, and I fell through the cracks. But I started in a technical school in Omaha, Nebraska, right next to a Job Corps in the late 1960s, so Omaha was an entirely different place than I had ever experienced. I'd never been in a restaurant, I'd never ridden on an elevator or escalator, never ridden on a city bus, and so entirely different experience for me, but it was something I could afford. The tuition was $150 a year, included books and other supplies. Graduated from there in a 12-month program, and then ultimately that school, that career technical training school, became a community college, and ultimately I went back and taught in the community college, so kind of full circle. Finished up a degree in finance and economics from the University of Wyoming when we moved here in 1976, lived in Centennial. Went on and finished some degrees at University of Wyoming, got a master's from Regis University in international studies, and then through my experience with the military, got another master's in national resource strategy. So yeah, a lot of different things. My background's kind of like a patchwork quilt, but it's worked. It works. It has worked.
It has worked. So you just mentioned it. So then you had a really long career in the military.
I did.
23 years.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how you came to serve in the military? And
a lot of my family members, my brothers had both been in Vietnam. My dad was in World War II. My grandpa served in the war. His brothers served in various capacities in the military. I always wanted to do that. And we were married. We had a young son, and I still had the itch to do it. And I knew I was aging out. And so one day I happened to be on a university campus and a recruiter was there. I signed up went home and said to my husband, guess what? Our life is about to change. He said, oh gosh, it's been changing ever since I met you. But so I followed through. I went to basic training. I was one of the oldest individuals to go through basic training. And after that, I did get a direct commission. So, and then kind of followed that path in the military. I was on the medical service corps side and ultimately came over to what we call the line side in the military. Ultimately became commander, a group commander. Deployed a couple of times to Iraq, to the no-fly zone of Iraq, and then also in Afghanistan, where I went back as a commander in 2004 and 5. So very, very fortunate to have those experiences to serve with young men and women who made up my command. My group command were from, I think, 17 different military installations from around the world. So you learn a lot in a command position where you have so many, young people. They had never seen me before and I hadn't seen them. But, it all fell into place. We get good training in the military and we know what the mission is and, you just go to work and you make it happen. So, yeah, I also, prior to that time, I had been selected to go to a senior service school and was selected what they call ICAF, which is the industrial college there at Fort Lessing there in Washington, D.C. Got to travel around the world with a group of Army Corps of Engineer guys. There were 15 of us all together and study mega construction projects around the world. Korea, Thailand, just very fortunate to have that experience too. We did a lot of travel in the United States, looking at infrastructure, looking at new technologies and things where I remember one trip we were out in San Francisco because of our top level security clearances. We were able to go down underneath the bridge when they were fortifying it, to make it stronger to withstand seismic activity or an attack. And that was a real special thing to be able to do. But follow Brown and Root and Kellogg and some of the big construction firms around the world, that was a fantastic time and opportunity.
And that must have fed into your idea of construction, and then later in your career you become involved in other construction and big energy projects. Mm-hmm. So we'll get to that. But really from the military, you also did quite a few stints in public service. I did.
And, people think, well, how can you transition from the military to the private sector or to the public sector? And I always say, in all those different sectors, you have a budget, you have a mission, and you have people. And you have responsibility to manage and to lead. So it's kind of always the same. Now, if you're in a theater of war, the demand for how you make decisions, how quickly, and the quality of your decisions really changes. But other than that, it's kind of all the same. It doesn't differ a lot. People always wondered how I could transition. I think they thought when I went into public sector side, I was going to give orders. Well, a direct order doesn't work very long. It might work if you have to take a hill in a military environment. You're in a real tough situation. You got to do whatever you need to do. It doesn't work day to day with people in a peacetime environment. And it doesn't even work back at base in a peacetime environment. So yeah, it was seamless for me, that transition between the military in the public sector and back in the private sector, kind of all the same.
And you're already talking about it, but it's really leadership. In my experience, folks that go through leadership training and have leadership experience in the military are the best of the best.
Well, you know what? We do get good training. You get tested at a very early age. You have some basic tenets of how to be a leader, but really you have to be put in a situation where you have a higher order of responsibilities and you have people to accomplish a mission and within a budget and all of that. And you have to really deliver. And in the military, it can be a life and death experience. So the stakes are very high. So you learn very quickly to minimize mistakes in dealing with people and dealing with issues. And I know I used to say to folks, I said, listen, make sure if you bring a problem to me, make sure it is really a crisis. Because if you say it is and I trust you, I may act. And I said, I want to make sure. So I'm going to trust you, but let's not do something that we don't intend to do. And I remember being younger in my career as a commander, and, young people would come in all out of breath and said, ma'am, we've got a problem. And I knew it wasn't a real problem, but I let them talk it through, and I would put the problem up on the right-hand corner of my desk, and they'd be back and they'd do nothing. They'd be back in about 3 days, and they'd say, thank you for fixing the problem. And I would have them sit down, and I'd look and say, Sergeant, Lieutenant, I did nothing because there wasn't a problem. It wasn't a crisis. So make sure when you power things up that you don't think it's a crisis when it's not a crisis. And I think that we can get really wrapped around the axle about a lot of things in a workplace. You have that,
Sure.
You have that too, Holly. And you have to keep a focus on at what level as a leader do you need to intervene? And at what level do you let others learn? I said, it's not bad to have somebody fall down and get some bruises, but I don't want them to break their femur.
Yeah.
You just don't want that kind of impact.
And you don't want them to break anyone else's fingers.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the refereeing that you do as well.
That's really well said. So from the military, you did transition to public service, first serving as Governor Geringer's chief of staff,
Yes.
and then the state auditor, and eventually a 2010 run for Wyoming governor. So can you talk about what drew you to these positions?
I knew that the military was coming to an end because I was aging out, and I thought, I want to serve. I want to, that service above self is really important to me. And I'm thinking, well, I've still got a lot left in me to serve others. And so I decided to take a run actually first I served as chief of staff, learned a heck of a lot. I had not been around state government before. So talk about being in a hot seat. When you become chief of staff or a governor, that's a real hot seat.
Yeah.
And you deal with you deal with all the agencies, you deal with the budget, you deal with legislators, you deal with communities. And I learned a lot there. And once again, I was able to apply so much from the experience I'd had in the military about people, because you're nothing in any of these positions, whether you're elected official, CEO, owner of a business, you are nothing without the people
Exactly.
that make it happen. And so I learned a lot. I brought those skills, that experience to the governor's office, served there, of course, for 4 years, decided at a later point to run for statewide office, because while I was chief of staff, I got an opportunity to see folks in one of the top 5 leadership positions. So I did run for state auditor. That was a learning experience, certainly the campaign alone. Running a campaign sometimes is entirely different than serving in office. And sometimes your personality really has to shift from what you do on the campaign trail, how you connect to serving. Once you get, things look different, as everybody will tell you, whether they're CEO, a university president, whether you in your position, Holly, or on the different positions I've had, things always look different on the other side of the desk, because all of a sudden you have more information, and all of a sudden people are looking at you to be the smart person in the room, which is kind of scary, but they're looking at you to have the answers. And oftentimes you don't have the answers, and you come back and you have to work with your folks to work it through and to figure out. So I brought those experiences. I learned a lot as chief of staff, learned a lot in my service as a state auditor, and did run for governor ultimately. And I'd forgotten the date, so you said 2010, so I'll take your word. And once again, a big learning experience, and really through that opportunity to campaign across Wyoming, I visited places that I would have never had an opportunity to visit. I connected with people. I have never had more people around me in support in any endeavor in my life. And it was an absolutely incredible experience. And people say, well, are you sorry? Are you glad you didn't win? Look what a mess that would have been. I said, no, I'm not glad I didn't win. I accepted it for what it was. But I said I wanted to win the election to serve the people of Wyoming at a different level. And it didn't work out. So then I went on and thinking, okay, now what am I going to do? I need to do something. I was pretty old at the time, but I'm thinking in my head, I'm still pretty young. So then I went on and fortunately took the opportunity. Was asked to join Rocky Mountain Power, which was another great learning experience.
But you must have had energy experience and like a lot of exposure as you were in all these public service roles. Like being an elected official in Wyoming, you have to intersect with energy, right?
Yeah, if energy's it for Wyoming, and there isn't any job you can have in Wyoming or as a resident of Wyoming where you don't touch energy. It's what we're all about. It's what drives our economy. It's what heats our houses, and energy funds our schools, and everything we do, we touch energy. So yes, my experience in really learning a lot more about the importance of the energy sector was when I was deployed and when I was in Afghanistan, because I had quite a bit of experience before I was deployed to Afghanistan. In fact, I had to pass a lot of tests on what we call standing up a bare base. You go in with your rucksack into a base that has nothing, and you're charged as a commander to stand up and have that base be fully operational in 72 hours. So that was one, I think it was at Lakehurst, where there's a big place for the Hindenburg to park, which Hindenburg is no more, but that was Lakehurst, and I ran an exercise there. I had men and women from, I think, 20 different military installations from around the world. I had civil engineers and I had chaplains. I had all kinds of folks in different capacities. I had supply, I had fuels, maintenance, all of those packages came in. And we were charged with standing up that base to full operational capacity. That was one of the tests I had to take to be selected for a commander in Afghanistan. So really, it was that experience that really turned me on to the needs to supply energy, because nothing works.
Nothing works.
Nothing works. And so learned a lot from my engineers, certainly. And then when I deployed to Afghanistan, once again, that base of Bagram at that time, it had moved from a bare base to a base with soft side with tents. And actually my office was in a big tent, but our billets, how we were housed, were in plywood huts. And so the need for electricity was great. And you'd look out in Afghanistan at night, there were no lights.
Yeah.
They don't have electricity in Afghanistan. But you also understand that an economy such as in Afghanistan and many other parts of the world will never be on the global economic stage until they can get electricity, until they have a supply of electricity.
Reliable electricity.
Reliable, safe electricity that's available to the masses. And so I learned a heck of a lot about electricity there, which carried me over to my work with the utility with Rocky Mountain Power. So it's been it's been a patchwork quilt of experiences, but lucky for me, everything has always merged into something else, and the experiences have helped me in that different space.
And I think that's a great kind of way to think about a career for anyone. Certainly been my experience as well. And I think it's so easy to take reliable, affordable energy for granted living in the U.S.
Well, what we do, what is there that gets, at Christmas time for sale that doesn't need to be plugged in?
Nothing.
And what do your kids want? And we treat it such a laissez-faire with how we treat electricity. We just expect, no matter where we build our home in the United States, no matter what we buy that needs to be plugged in, no matter how many plug-ins we have in a new home, we just expect to be able to plug and play. And we want to do it almost free. And we don't want there to be any disruptions in the supply. I tell you what, utilities have a heavy, heavy lift today because the expectations of the public have changed dramatically about, we want it now, we want it cheap, we want it reliable, but also all of the growth in demand for electricity is there. So utilities are caught, in the old way of supplying electricity that worked for a very long time. It worked for the utilities, it worked for the investors, and it worked for the consumer. But as consumers changed and wanted something different, they wanted more of it, and they wanted more of it generated generated differently, it puts a heavy strain on utilities today.
And so I don't think we've said what your title is. So you were vice president for Rocky Mountain Power in Wyoming.
Yes.
Rocky Mountain Power is part of PacifiCorp.
Yes.
And for our listeners, Cindy Crane, the CEO of PacifiCorp, was on episode 34 if you want to learn more about that company and their operations. So the demand, it was different when you were in that role. Their demand wasn't growing. Can you talk a little bit about what that role was?
Yeah, the demand was very flat. Actually brought in at the time we were kind of looking to add some generation. It was a real exciting time for PacifiCorp. They have a history of supplying reliable electricity and, safe, all of those things. The cost side of that, it costs more to generate and it costs more to transmit and distribute than it ever has, and people want more of it. So the cost component has changed. Some expectations have changed a lot from the consumer. So brought in kind of as we were going from kind of transitioning that organization, which was a real exciting time with PacifiCorp, and did get to work with Cindy, and she's a fabulous leader, and enjoyed my experience. I learned a lot from Cindy, but I also learned a heck of a lot about the utility sector. And we stood up what we call Energy Vision 2020 during my time there. That was one of the big things put on my desk for Wyoming. It was 140 miles of new 500 kV transmission. We repowered, put new technology at some old wind farms, and we also built some new wind. And also, at that time, those coal plants were churning out, and we didn't hear the talk about it. It just started, kind of in the middle of my term with PacifiCorp. We didn't feel the impact, the changes in customer demand, a lot from outside of the state, a lot from DC. We didn't see that change happening as much until the last few years of my tenure with them. So all the dynamics around how utilities operate today, how they make money for investors, how they continue to provide a low-cost, reliable service to consumers, all of those dynamics are changing.
We have to be grateful for our utilities too. When the power goes out, everyone knows right away. Everyone's upset.
Well, here's the deal. Your screen lights up with everybody. If you are in India or in many, many other countries around the world. I remember when India, during some of my tenure with Rocky, they had like a 6-week outage. And,
wow.
People don't react like we do. We are very connected to our electricity supply, everything of what we do in the United States. And we take it for granted.
We do.
And I think also from the utility side, we haven't probably done or didn't do the job that we should have done in educating people about what it really costs to have that supply of energy and that electricity into your home. And it's pretty monumental because those costs go up all the time for utilities. And it's tougher, I think, all the time for them to recover those costs. And yet people expect that they always have, that they continue to upgrade these systems and continue to do it faster and better and, all of those things.
Yeah.
We're pretty impatient.
We are impatient. If my electricity is reliable 99.99% of the time, I'm going to be complaining about the 0.01%.
Yeah. And we have a generation, your kids, and certainly my grandkids, they don't know what it's like to be without electricity. Mm-hmm. It's always been the constant in their life.
Oh, yeah.
And everything they buy, as I said, needs to be plugged in, and they don't know anything differently. I had my grandson said, "Grandma," he said, "you need a fast charger." I said, "Hey, that's just too slow." I'm like, "Fast charger? What the heck's he talking about?" But I figured it out right away.
Yeah, I can't say that's always ideal. They need a little break from
a little temperance.
Yeah, we like to take our kids camping so they can get a break.
Amen.
From that stuff.
And us too.
So we're seeing a lot of innovation and large demonstration projects in Wyoming, whether it's wind or carbon capture, rare earths and critical minerals, and of course, nuclear energy. You have one of the best vantage points of why these projects are drawn to Wyoming. Can you share why we have such a diversity of projects moving forward and what you think the state's advantage is? Well,
I think, first of all, Wyoming has a very, very high energy IQ.
Yep.
We live with it. As I said, energy is a part of our everyday life. It funds our schools. It makes our quality of life a very high quality of living experience in Wyoming. We have our university that's very steeped in energy. And so I think that it's just a natural for folks. And it always amazes me that, some of these entrepreneurs, the tech folks, they woke up and said, gosh, Wyoming's a place to be. And we've seen that. We've seen more and more diverse projects, high-tech projects, energy projects come into Wyoming. You get to see that from the School of Energy Resources and the folks you deal with, the corporate folks you deal with from all kinds of energy producers. We've seen that with our Wyoming Energy Authority. Those young folks there, they get to see everybody's really hopeful. And Wyoming also has had some resources to help bring some of those technologies along, and that's a good thing. And so it's kind of all that's acceptance. And I found that with the TerraPower project, TerraPower is a nuclear innovation company, started in about 2008, I think. And also, when the company knew they were going to have this technology deploy, the first place they looked to deploy it was in Wyoming because, first of all, the energy IQ, they felt it would be understood and they felt it would be accepted. Now, remember, this will be Wyoming's first nuclear power reactor
at all.
Never.
Yeah.
At all. And we appreciate what coal has brought to Wyoming. I'm a coal girl too. Mm-hmm. We appreciate it. I think maybe the federal government, in their hurry to disconnect coal plants, I think some of them too early to balance some of the things they wanted to do in D.C. I think that's really hurting us right now. That's part of our crunch. Yeah. You don't bring a coal plant online once you've pulled it offline, right, once it's gone cold. So this project's an exciting project. We knew the leaders before I joined the company knew they wanted to do it in Wyoming. Wyoming was chosen once they went through the process and got the award for a demonstration project. Then, of course, the work began to find a site in Wyoming. That project, and I very quickly joined the organization. It's a good thing I'd started my company, and my husband was like, oh gosh, I sure hope she has a client because otherwise she's going to be home all the time. So he probably was the one that celebrated my joining TerraPower the most. But we brought that in. We looked at, the decision was made far above my pay grade to put that in a community where the coal plant was going to be closing for a whole variety of reasons. And then, of course, went and talked to all 4 communities. Now, I can't think of another state in the United States where you would have 4 communities actively vying and that had never had a nuclear power reactor in their state actively vying for a nuclear power demonstration project. But we had that from all 4 communities, the Wyodak up in the northeast corner of the state, from Dave Johnston down in Glen Rock, from Jim Bridger in Rock Springs, and also from the Naughton plant. And Naughton was chosen. That plant, as you know, we're not sited at the coal plant because that's, today you need a pretty new site to do this. You're not going to use a lot of things left over from a coal generating facility. But ultimately chosen, as I said, for a whole bunch of seismic. There were a whole bunch of decisions, but mainly because they had the infrastructure needed once the power was generated that it could be moved. You can't beam that stuff. You got to have transmission and distribution, and that was one of the concerns. But also, as in the other 3 communities, they wanted the project in camera, so we were open with the welcome arms. The company said, "Now, Rita, what do we need to do? We got the technology. We're working on that. How do we gain the support we need?" And I said, well, you start with the people in the community. And that's how we did. We layered that on. And literally, we've talked to, and I bring Chris, the president, in a lot, and others from the company. We've talked to literally hundreds and hundreds of people. We've been active at the University of Wyoming, the Energy Authority, partnering with the governor, community colleges and county commissioners, city councils. Folks have just been wonderful and welcoming for the project. I still believe this would never have happened as quickly or as openly with people inviting us in any other state in the United States.
Sure.
we're the beneficiary of that.
That's such a great story. And I completely agree with the energy literacy, people being open to communities that have never had a nuclear power plant being open to a new advanced reactor. I think TerraPower and you have done a really good job about working with communities, but it's great that they're so open, and it would be hard to overstate the opportunity for Wyoming.
Oh, here is the deal. I underestimated it too. I did not realize how global,
right,
what the global look would be back.
Right.
It used to be a few years ago, if you asked, you could ask people in Wyoming where Kimmer was, and a lot of people said, well, I don't really know. I've never been there. And now over in Brussels,
right,
and in Europe and in South Africa, and around the world, people are talking about Kimmer, Wyoming. I know the mayor once said to me of Kimmer, said, Rita, he said, I've really never given a real interview to a television station, and I'm being contacted from global news agencies. And he said, what do? I said, you just tell the story. You don't have to make up anything. If you don't know, you tell them you don't know, but you tell the story about your community and what's coming and what the impact is, and that this will be a new anchor tenant in the community. It was never designed to replace coal. The coal already had an end of, if we call it, useful life. It was done, as we will do now, because they're converting a couple of those units to gas to extend the life. It'll augment. It'll be some more electrons, and gosh knows there's a huge demand for the electricity that we're going to have. It's a 345 megawatt project that has the capacity to store another 500 megawatts for use on demand. So all that's good news. And the people in the community are excited. I'm excited because we are, working construction of our sodium test fill facility, which will be used by researchers not only across the United States but around the world. Imagine that happening in Kimmer, Wyoming.
Right.
We can already see changes on Main Street, the addition of the Opera House. It's that's the old restaurant, the old Opera House that was converted to a bakery and a food place. So the coffee shop. I mean, all the other things that are growing in that community and helping that community be more economically viable.
And it's really just getting started. When the facility is up and running, TerraPower's ultimate goals are to deploy this technology nationally and internationally. So we will have people that haven't just heard of Kimmer, but will come visit it.
Yeah, and I feel a lot of those calls today was site visits, and we have to be really careful because it is an active construction site.
Yeah.
But we literally have entertained folks from around the world that are coming to the site to see what we're doing. I wish, we always wish, I wish we had that in the commercial space today, because we are literally getting calls every week, as you know Chris very well, and others getting calls. We want the technology now. We need the technology now, and it's not quite there. We're in the United States, I think we're just a few steps behind of where we should be. We took our eye off the ball, frankly. We outsourced fuels. We did a lot of things that really are hurting, and we're having to make up for that now. And it takes time and it takes money. It's a heavy lift. I'm the first to admit this is a heavy lift, but I'm confident in the team that we have that this reactor will come, out of the lab and into the commercial space and be the hallmark for Wyoming.
Sure. And I think that's a great point. Even the fuel production, Wyoming is the nation's largest uranium producer. Our production levels are not what they once were, but they have been growing recently. And I think that's partly the recognition that we do need secure sources of uranium. And so as TerraPower's technology is demonstrated and exported around the world, there will be more need for uranium. So that will also benefit the state. So if you want to learn more about the TerraPower Natrium technology or the facility under construction, you can go to episode 37, and Jeff Nabin talks a lot about that. But like I said, there's so many opportunities for Wyoming and for Wyomingites. And you, Rita, you've been a large supporter, a really great supporter of educational and training opportunities for Wyoming folks interested in working in the field of nuclear energy. You've given to the School of Energy Resources. You're supporting students in experiential learning. We're standing up a nuclear energy science certificate so our students can be competitive. Can you talk about your motivation and how you're not just working on the power plant, but making sure that we get the full benefits here in the state by helping our workers?
Sure. I think growing up, in poverty, where my mom and dad didn't have any advanced education, and seeing the impact on the family for for just not having options. It has really driven me not only to seek out options myself for training. I started, in quote, training at a technical school, but moving into broadening my experiences and my education. And I think that is my main driver, because I always say to young people, build options. Build options so that you can choose and not have others choose how you have to work. And so I'm very interested in education. I'm very interested, certainly in our community colleges in Wyoming, technical training. There's a wonderful opportunity for young men and women today in the trades. I mean, We need welders, we need plumbers, we need carpenters, and we need those folks now.
Absolutely.
And we, as in TerraPower, are in a very competitive environment for workers, for people that are skilled. We have a lot of Wyoming subs on the site now, and I'm really proud of that. But we need more. And as my boss says, Chris Levesque says, we're going to need all of you. We're going to need all of you. And of course, learning to operate an energy island for folks in Wyoming that have worked with generation plants and other things, not a lot of training needs to be done there. We just need to get those folks. We're going to need security people, high levels of security. The nuclear power reactor, obviously that's a different level of training and guided, directed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But these are going to be great jobs, and those jobs will beget other jobs, not only just in Cameron, but around the state. And I think it's exciting, and I will never, ever back away from supporting education for young people at all different levels. I always say, start at a community college, start at a technical school, get a little jingle in your pocket, particularly if you haven't been out, you haven't learned to work with your hand, developed a skill or a trade, and then go on and seek other opportunities if you so desire. But it's there. We have 7 great community colleges in Wyoming. I get to work with them. Our University of Wyoming, I owe the life I have today for the University of Wyoming, and I will never forget those professors and others. I had to leave one time in the middle. I was deployed for like 9 months, so I left school. I was working on a degree in accounting and finance, and I'll never forget George McGrail from the College of Business had been a military person himself, and I came back and I was pretty out of it. It had been a different world. I'd been over in Iraq in the no-fly zone for quite a while. He helped me through that transition, and he didn't have to. And it was a real struggle to me, having been gone and coming back to Costa County. But he saw something in me, and he helped me through that whole next year. Or I may have just left because it was like a dissonance. I just didn't fit. And at that time, there weren't as many non-traditional students as there are today at the university, but I'll never forget the people that opened the doors and made it possible for me. And the University of Wyoming is actually truly a diamond in the state of Wyoming, and we need to be so proud of what our university does. And we have young men and women, graduates from the University of Wyoming, working around the world. And of course, my interests too, and it's a selfish interest, but is having those young men and women that are touching the nuclear sphere become very actively involved with TerraPower.
Yeah, and it's already starting. So I was going to ask you, what would you say to a student, whether they're in high school or early in their college career, maybe thinking of going back to school, about pursuing a career in energy?
I think it's absolutely the right choice. America, the world spins on energy, and it is absolutely what powers us in a bigger sense. I think there's so many opportunities for both men and women in the energy space, and the careers that folks are working on today are constantly changing. In fact, they'll be very different in 5 years, particularly with the integration of AI. They're going to be very different. Get as much education and training you can. Keep your eye on what's happening in the energy sector. Keep your eye on, what's happened globally. Keep your eye geopolitical, all of those kinds of things. The, weather, all of those things are very important. You make your own options and never give up on learning. Take it upon yourself if your company, doesn't pay for a lot of education beyond what you're bringing. Take it upon yourself. Become an independent learner. There are all kinds of ways today for you to achieve even more training at your fingertips. So never let up.
That's really true.
Keep on learning.
That's a great, really well said. And I'll just give a quick plug that I think the University of Wyoming, being in an energy state, we have so many good opportunities to pursue a career in energy or an education in energy. Of course, at the School of Energy Resources, we have our Energy Resource Management and Development program, which has 2 concentrations, energy and environmental systems and land management. But we have certificates we're creating with the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences and classes from the College of Law. And I think that's one thing the University of Wyoming does really well is energy topics and other topics working together in an interdisciplinary way. So you can take these really unique programs to have a really well-rounded education in this space. So check out all those programs because there's a lot of opportunities.
Yeah. And get out there and get your boots dirty.
Get your boots dirty. Yeah. And yeah, we have a lot of that too, though. We have a lot of experiential learning opportunities, internships. If you want one, you can probably find one.
Yeah, so. and that's one thing about a land-grant university. Yeah. I think a land-grant universities really understand the student and really very very supportive of making sure they don't just get a degree and then, and that's the end, that they get a degree and get a job. That's really important. And I'm really happy to see all these programs at the university where you bring in more and more people, because it didn't used to be that at the university we didn't invite a lot of the energy businesses in, but totally they are making a lot of decisions at the University of Wyoming. So there's a reality that brings a reality to what you're doing in the classroom. And I just say to students, you will never regret the time spent on a campus, and it will improve the quality of life, and the quality of life, not just for you, but for your family.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. So for our last question, we always shift gears. Rita, you've done so much in the world and in Wyoming. Is there if I ask you, what is your favorite place to visit in Wyoming, do you have one answer?
Well, I would say when we moved to Wyoming from Nebraska with my husband and I in 1976, we built a home in Centennial. Oh. And I have a real heart pull to Centennial, but there are so many beautiful places around Wyoming. I love small towns. They're kind of my favorite, kind of the way I grew up. But, anyway from, Chugwater to Manderson, probably been there, done that, and enjoy it every time. I've had people say, well, isn't that pretty awful driving all across Wyoming through the desert? And I say, it's absolutely glorious.
It is.
And
calming.
I get to do what other people pay money to do to come on a vacation from. I get to do it in the course of my work. And I see the sunsets. I see the moon. I see all those things. And a few weeks ago, I was driving from Wheatland into Cheyenne at night, and that moon coming up over the grasslands. Absolutely extraordinary. I get to do that and all the time. Yeah. And aren't I lucky?
Don't tell everyone. It's amazing.
Don't come fishing in my hole.
Well, Rita, thank you so much for everything you do for Wyoming, for the University of Wyoming, for the School of Energy Resources, and thank you for doing this podcast.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.